All right, so why don't we call the order at 5:05? Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Our first order of business I see is public comment. As a reminder, since we are in hybrid meeting, we always offer the option of in-person comment first. And then we will then open up to any of our attendees online to provide comment as well. If you are online, directions follow as per our other meetings. You can certainly raise your hand. Let us know if you'd like to provide comment, and Devin will make sure you can unmute. And you can provide your comment. Please remember to provide a name and address prior to speaking. So at this time, I will open it up for in-person public comment. All right, we're all set there. So Devin, anybody online?
See no hands, but
One more second.
we're all set.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next order of business is minutes. So could I get a motion to approve the attached March 30th, 2022 minutes?
Motion to approve. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next order of business is correspondence. So this is correspondence received 3/29/2022 through 4/25/2022. You can see there are a number of comments that we did receive. These were all received via the comment form or the contact form online. So they were all included in your agenda packet, have all been responded to at this time. We want to make sure the committee and anybody referring to our agenda saw those comments and took those into account as we move forward in our conversations. I always remind everybody as well to the people that are attending or listening to our meetings after the fact, please always remember, if you cannot do with us in person to provide a comment, that is a great opportunity. As you can see, other community members have utilized that form on our website. At the very bottom of it, please take the opportunity to ask questions. Look for clarification on items, anything that you want to find out from the building committee, please, by all means, reach out to us in that way, and we'll get back to you in a timely fashion with a very thorough answer. So just an important way to stay in touch with us and make sure that the community stays engaged. So always a reminder to make sure you use that form when you can. All right, so we are then going to go into reports. Got quite a few to go through tonight, and some of them are going to be abbreviated. You'll see this is a large topic of conversation for value engineering that you'll see as a separate agenda item. So I just kind of wanted to lay that out there for everybody to keep in mind. But from a chair report perspective, I do want to take an opportunity to, first of all, express my gratitude, my thank you on behalf of the entire building committee to our professional partners, to our working group. All the design work that's been taking place has been really excellent work. A lot of great conversations going on. This is not easy for anybody to have these conversations and walk through. We were really asking for a lot of flexibility in some of the conversations that we're having, moving forward, and kind of a forward look and impacts to this project. So I wanted to make sure that it is understood how much that's appreciated from us, and that we understand that it is a lot of work, a lot of decisions being made, and a lot of give and take in conversations, and it's acknowledged and really appreciated. So to everybody on the building committee, I say thank you, and I know the building committee says thank you to our professional partners as well. So we appreciate that partnership. That's kind of what I wanted to say tonight for chair report. Just as a reminder, this is a lot of work and a lot of effort from everybody. So we will move right into additional reports. So town council liaison report, Johnny.
So town council met last night and had consideration for special topics, and we covered the survey. So we had a presentation from the Center of Research and Public Policy on the 1928 building, and also some questions that were given out. As you know, when I spoke at the last meeting, that we had a survey that was done. We had close to 1,000 respondents, like 997, which only a few were discounted for not being able to vote in Farmington, et cetera. They gave a presentation and kind of laid out all the numbers on the potential support for the 1928 with or without ARPA funds, support for additional uses for some of the older areas like the gyms, the 1952, the 64, et cetera, with and without ARPA funds. It was very open-ended, but more of a survey to get the pulse of the town. The town council felt that this survey was needed in order to see if there was even an appetite for something like this in town before we gear up with building committees and all that stuff. I suggest everybody go look at it. It's very interesting. There was some correlations made between this survey and the survey that was done previous to going out for referendum on the high school. Yesterday, we voted to approve the ad hoc committee for the 1928 recommendations for future use. We also approved the statement of needs. At the following meeting, we'll be looking at the charge of the committee. I do want to take just a second to be very clear, because some of the comments that I've heard, not necessarily yesterday at the council meeting, but just in general, and then I made the mistake of trolling Facebook to see what other comments are out there, and I mistake. But I do feel like I want to just take 30 seconds to clear some of the misinformation that's out there and just be, very direct in saying that the high school project that has nothing to do with what we're talking about potentially in the 1928. This is, as I've been sitting with you guys for the last 3-something years or whatever, this has been a project all on its own. There's never been any discussion about what's going on other than, separating the 1928 building from the project before referendum. And we've tried to be very, very clear about that. Now that we have the high school project moving along, we're looking at if there's potential uses. And this committee that we're putting together is no endorsement by any means of what direction the town or the town council or eventually the people of Farmington will vote on a referendum of a project in the future. So this is strictly to find the information, go out, hire an architect, hire an estimator, see what some high-level uses and costs could be, and then come back with a recommendation for a referendum down, if that in, I think, either April, May of next year. The work over the next year is going to be just to gather this information and try to do it. What I want to make sure is that between the building committee here and the building committee there, hence the confusion, that the high school project or the central office project is completely separate from anything that may or may not happen on that. And then I just want to touch on one other thing, and hopefully people understand this is, there's a lot of correlations being made about how, these old buildings, if they're still good to use, why didn't we use them? And I don't need to rehash it here. There's 3.5 years of records and Zoom meetings and calls and documents of exactly why we made the decisions that were made at the time and why Farmington residents voted to have this new school project go through. What we're talking about potential uses, again, its potential is a 100% different from what we were looking at from the eyes of programmatic needs and what the high school or the high school community would need. That being said, I'll give regular updates as they go. There will be a building committee potentially put together. It's not official yet because we've got to do another meeting with a charge to start digging into this. And as I made the comment last night, that at the end of this 1928 building committee, it may be a recommendation to do absolutely nothing. It may be a recommendation to keep partial. It may be a recommendation to keep more and look into the future. But as anybody who knows me, there's always a cost benefit to everything that we do. And we want to make sure that that is communicated correctly from that end. So I'll try to be very clear in anything I say, whether it's high school building committee or 1928, which, we don't know who that makeup will be yet anyways. But that being said, just to make sure it's very clear that people understand, there's loads of information on the FSH building project .org that has everything that you need to know about the high school. And as the committee starts to function, there'll be their own mechanism to get the information out clearly. That's it. Thank you. That's it.
Any questions for Jeremy on that? That's more to come.
Thank you.
We'll go to Board of Education liaison report. If we want to do anything in addition, nothing specific. All right, so then we will go to report number 4, owner's rep report.
Sure. So just briefly, a couple items. One thing we did. So in our last meeting, we presented that we were getting ready to have a few meetings with the state. One is a Pcr meeting, and then a design development review meeting of the entire project. The Pcr is the meeting for our enabling plan, or vice versa, sorry. And so the enabling is that phase 1 plan we talked about at that last meeting that we're getting ready to prepare for. We had those lengthy three-hour meetings with the state. They requested information back from us. At the same time, or just before that, we presented to the board of ed, so we did have an opportunity to present the project there. That was to move forward, that phase 1 enabling plan to move forward, and from the state to support for that phase 1 enabling plan. So Laura will talk a little bit more about where we are with the bidding process and what's to come, but I just wanted to report on those 2 things before we get into some items further down in the list of the agenda. So.
Any questions for Mark? Big accomplishment that we should gloss over. The fact that we went out to bid, so that's a big part of our process, big milestone for us. So.
Yeah,
more to come. It'll be interesting to see when we get back.
That's right. We'll see what comes back on those bids, and we'll have an opportunity to review them and identify next steps for moving forward.
Excellent. All right, great. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to architect report.
Yes, good evening, everyone. As you probably already know, all projects are undergoing a cost escalation for various reasons. Farmington High School project is no different. And so when we received the design development cost estimate from ONG, it was higher than the budget. We all know that. And so there were many sessions with the work group, with the construction manager, with our consultants, to try to bring that cost down. And I believe later you'll be having that discussion about how we achieve that. But it was a joint effort among everybody. So thanks to ONG, CSG for that help. We do have a project to build, and the next step for us is to finish the plans and specs, the working drawings, or CDs, the construction documents as they're referred to commonly. My estimate right now, we're about the 40–45% completion of that phase. We do have to deliver in May, on May 20th, the goal of giving to ONG the pricing set. And the pricing set is the status of the construction documents at that time. And it's the nature of this work that some consultants' documents will be almost 100% done, like the site packages, and some will be less than that. Some will be 50% done, some will be 80% done. But as the blended average, we're hoping that we identify all of the scope, that we clearly identify all of the alternates. So when the pricing set is delivered, ONG has clear direction on the scope of work. And we're making good progress. I'm on the phone every day with our sub-consultants, making sure that we're keeping on pace. That's really all I need to report this evening.
Any questions?
Just a quick question, and more just to make sure it's clear. A lot of comments I've received is, worrying about cost escalation, especially for the residents of Farmington, and, that prohibiting the project from going forward. Can you just give us a 30-second overview of, about what we're gonna dive into tonight, but just for the people that are on the meeting now and aren't gonna hang around for all the details of how that process works, and is it pretty typical, and do you run into this, and have you built in some, and then maybe ONG can jump in on that too, but have you built in contingencies, and if we are over budget, then what's that process?
Sure. So contingencies is one strategy when you get into a cost management process. And so there are contingencies built into this thing, into this budget. ONG can talk about that. We actually had some disagreement about the contingencies. And ONG, I think, is recommending a higher contingency than I would recommend at this stage, but they are the professionals. And so we're relying on ONG's contingency fund to cover any possible overages. That's one strategy. Another strategy is to prepare some bid alternates. And so I think later this evening, you will be going through that list of bid alternates. These are some alternative ways of building components of the project. Concrete masonry block instead of drywall, for example. They both function as partitions, separating spaces on the interior. It's just a different way to build those partitions. And so we have built in, one of the alternates is the gyp partitions in certain locations with durable wall covering in lieu of masonry partitions. That's an alternate. If bids are favorable on bid date, then the committee will have to make a decision whether they want to accept that alternate or not. And I think we have a total of 8 or 9 alternates that we've identified. Again, this is normal. We're experiencing this on other projects that we've received cost estimates recently. And so this is the process that we're going through right now.
Thank you.
We'll talk actually a little bit more about that in communications as well. John, to kind of circle back around with how we can, I think, help support.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts?
Meg, this is Michael. I just have a follow-up question to Richard's explanation of kind of where we're at and how we might mitigate that. It might be helpful. It's certainly how we have been managing thus far to identify either some value engineering items or some alternates that might be added if the resources were there, but taking them out of the full scope of the project now. I just wondered to the magnitude of how far that can be tested either with existing contingencies or other things, given that we're, as you say, we're about 50% of the way there. Not the right way to characterize it, but we're getting close to the construction documents, and then at that point in time, we're getting to a process where we move outside of the internal cost estimation, and we're bringing the bids out to the different subcontractors, and we may have bigger variances. It would be helpful to know, doesn't have to be something that you answer now, Richard, but it would be helpful to have a clear strategy of where are we outstripped in our ability to really continue to mitigate through the strategies that you've identified. And that would just be helpful as a resource to understand. Again, not tonight, and you're not prepared for that, but would it be unreasonable that we potentially have additional items that we need to be going back in and reducing from the budget as we continue to move forward that may be in the same magnitude of the ones that we have done twice now through value engineering?
Okay, I'll answer it partially, and I think I'll probably have to come back to you with a more thorough response. I feel good about where we are. I think, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but you'll say it differently if you feel differently. I hope O&G feels good about where we are. Our role is to make sure that you get a good quality building, that we deliver the program that was approved by the Board of Education. That program has not been affected except for one outdoor facility feature that we'll discuss later today. That is something that is being identified as an alternate. So the interior of the building, the scope of the interior, the number of spaces is the same as what we had previously planned. The mechanical systems are the same. So all of those features are intact. We had during our value management discussions looking at the amount of glazing. We have reduced the amount of glazing in our strategy, but not to the point where it hurts the building or the interior. We're reducing the amount of skylights. That was an item that was suggested by O&G, and so we've done that. And it doesn't affect the daylight that we have promised we wanted to get into the core of the building. We don't want to eliminate that. Now, if you're asking me, how do we know when we're going to call it quits? I think we're far from that. I really do, Michael. So I feel confident where we are. I think O&G feels confident as well. We're very far from calling it quits.
Yeah, and for the record, Richard, I do think that I would echo what you have shared, that those in the working group have understood that compromise is what we've been focused on, and that the items that have been identified to be substituted in the project have a rational basis for them. I guess what I'm just trying to figure out is, we're not at the end, and as we get closer to that, what other additional levers might there be for us outside of the contingency? And that's what I'm saying. That's not an answer now.
Michael, you're fading away.
Sorry, I think that's one of those things that we might need to, continue to keep our focus on as we move forward.
Right.
Any other, thanks, Michael. Any other thoughts or questions for Richard?
I would just add to, the working group has also identified items that are still pending and being investigated and worked through, right? So there is another list of items that we've been talking about that we haven't, completely rejected and haven't completely approved, and maybe we don't need to go down that pending list, but that work continues. So there are some things, and then Richard, I may have missed it if you identified escalation as another strategy that we went through, right? So we've changed our escalation points through the process.
Good point. So when we started, I believe we were at a 4% annual escalation rate. I think O&G is now recommending an annual escalation rate of 8%.
Correct.
So that shows a more conservative approach. And I don't disagree with that strategy. It shows a more conservative approach to budgeting the project.
So those are dollars that increase, right, are increase the cost, and therefore having to find things to balance with, so that we're strategizing with escalation.
And this is a consequence of the situation that we're all in right now. I mean, the procurement is more difficult. There's a war on now with gas prices being increased. This is just a circumstance, and so all of these strategies are a reaction to the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to communication subcommittee report. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm so far away.
Somehow I put a check mark. I know, I didn't even look on there, so far away, you're right, and I put a check mark by it, and it was, I'm so sorry. My fault completely. I'm sorry, Laura. Construction manager report.
All right, so we're out to bid for phase one. As Michael had We went up to the state, we got our approval letter, so we're out to bid. We have an on-site pre-bid meeting next Tuesday, May 3rd at 3:30. You don't need to, nobody needs to show up, we're just gonna show the contractors around. So that's being organized. As was mentioned, we've been working on the pricing. We have completed our review of the design development set. We had, at the our last meeting, we said we were finishing our review. We have since passed those comments on to the design team. We do like a clash detection of the model, so we've given our review comments on that. And then we've also placed newspaper ads. So as we're out to bid, an ad needs to be placed in Hartford Current as well as a minority publication. So we've done that. And then to kind of run through the schedule, we remain on schedule as of now. And I did a horrible color this time. I did yellow instead of the green, so it doesn't really show up too swell. But just to highlight the look ahead, the red line represents where we are as of today. And there's a highlight just through May of what's up and coming. So again, we went out to bid. We started on Monday, this past Monday. Still working on the CM contract approval and the two executive sessions that you guys are going to, or the executive session for the two contracts, hopefully will get resolved tonight. You will need these consultant services pretty soon, within the next month. We're going to be looking to have these reviews start. So we only have so much time to be kicking that can down the road, because we are going to need this. This is critical to our next phase, or going up to the state for the next phase. So especially the local review aspect of it. Towards the just up and coming, I'll be working on what's called a GMP. So once we get the bids in for this phase one, O&G will put together a little cost summary based on where the bids are, our costs, a schedule, and anything else. It'll be a little like mini document, and we'll be looking for that approval. I have it prepared sometime coming up. So just to be on the lookout for that. Early June, we're going to want you to approve that, meet and approve that, tell us to go. It does take about 3 weeks, 2.5 to 3 weeks to get a contractor on site from the minute we get, notice to proceed. So you guys have to approve, we have to give a letter, we have to write the contract, bonds, insurance. So it all takes time. It's not that you go and we show up the next day. So just bear that in mind with our July start date. There's all these things that come into play before that. Next page now. What else is there? So as Richard mentioned, we are going to be coming in with this phase 2. They're still working on the construction documents. We've got through our whole state approval process, tracking that. At some point, you're going to need to revisit your ed specs. I have it probably too soon again. I keep kind of pushing it away, but don't forget, you're going to have to revisit your ed specs and improve your guys' ed specs. And then we've got this FF&E and IT programming just as a start. And that's pretty much it. I mean, we're moving towards the continuation of construction documents, and roll it down a little bit more. I've got our regulatory approvals on here as well. Oh, no, next page. All right, so OSTA review, we did get our application in, so that's an ongoing item. I haven't seen any sort of comments or questions come back yet, so I'm not sure where we are in that process, but we're tagging that. We put our flood management certification in, and I know that there's a technical issue on the stormwater general permit application. That's something that we're tracking as well. We're right on the cusp of the start of that. There's an issue with DEP's website, like people can't upload the application, so there's some technical issue that's going on. So it's a very defined review period that they have before you're allowed to start work on site. So this is something so these three are all pretty much, front and center with trying to keep an eye on those. And again, just our bidding schedule, we're out to bid. Oh, right now the bids are due May 17th. If I didn't say that before, we'll be scoping and then making a recommendation. So this is what's up and coming over the next month. That's all I got.
Question, Laurel. Could you repeat the time of that pre-construction site meeting next week?
Oh, I didn't say, I don't think. So the time is 3:30. It's next Tuesday.
And who will attend that meeting?
I've asked SLR to be there.
Okay.
and
That's
Victor Segan, they
That's
both
the site
confirmed.
engineer and site plan.
Yeah, it's mostly site work, so I want to make sure they were going to be there, and they all confirmed they're going to be there. I don't know if you or Michael are going to be there, it's up to you if you want to go.
I'll put it on my calendar and I hope to be there, but I'm in the process of finishing the CDs.
Well, because, you know, not for nothing, but those guys can
Yeah, they can have it.
take care of it. And it's non-mandatory, so we don't know who's gonna show up. We've had quite a bit of interest. A lot of site contractors are keeping an eye on this one as well as the Farmington project, so they're all aware of it.
Thank
And I still need a room.
Yes, so Sam reached out to Scott, Denise, for a room to assign, so help with, I'll reach back out to him today, but
It's not a big deal. We could put a sign up at the front door to direct people. It's not a big deal. We just need a place to congregate. And contractors tend to show up early and want to walk around on their own. So, you know, probably around 3, they might start to show up before a meeting.
we can. Well, I guess it's too late to do that. Just to say, we don't want you lurking around the school.
Yeah. Well, it's after school, right? 3 o'clock is after school.
Yeah, that's correct. Mark, we're gonna look at a good location near the entrance there for everybody. So Denise will be back in touch with you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's after school, but we'll still have students in the building for activities, but we'll have everybody gather at the front and we'll go from there.
That's it.
Any other questions for Laurel? Comments, thoughts?
I need some idea of ed spec approval. It takes 2 readings with 2 Board of Education meetings to update the ed spec. So the timing of that, I have 2 more board meetings for this year. We can certainly do special board meetings, but we start to get into vacations of either administrators or board members. It's hard to get a quorum in the summer. So just say that's probably the important.
The ideal time. We don't need it for PCR, right? They don't look for it then.
I don't think so.
Just don't want it. Your ed specs have to match everything, so.
They can be done at any time.
In between months from the
If
class.
they're not gonna change now, it's probably better to just get them approved now, get them out of the way. but they can
Yeah.
be done
There might be some programming, square footage things in the classroom size things. Right.
Yeah, I'm probably showing it too early, but still, it is coming into that time frame where we're trying to finish documents and all that, so. If not before the summer, I mean, at least in the fall, right, whenever. You don't want
Yeah,
to.
we should probably have it, we should at least have the first reading before the PCR.
Which is end of June, right?
End of June.
End of June, which is before school gets out. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think the timing of it's just landing on it.
So Kathy, we can sort of talk offline and figure out what.
Sure.
What would
Yeah,
work
that's-
best with your group.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Can't believe I almost skipped that. I almost dropped it. I love gift cards. That's like a favorite part. All right. So now we can go on to communications subcommittee report. You want to take a slip, Kat? Yeah. All right. So we did have a communication subcommittee meeting just prior to this meeting. Tonight, we had a couple items on our agenda. The first was website updates. The main topic of conversation around website updates was going back to your conversation question, Johnny, about giving kind of a financial summary and an explanation that we could add to the website for community members and as a resource for us and anybody who's actually out in the community, if we get a question, having a place to direct people to really get a good, solid answer on the practices that we are executing on here to make sure we are understanding our costs and keeping those in alignment. So I don't know if you want to do just kind of a quick overview of the plan.
Yeah, so we've been getting a lot of questions, some through the website, we've been seeing some online, just about, what are we doing to deal with escalation and inflation and the cost of goods and everything. And as we're all well aware of, because we've already done it before, is we've updated our budget. We've had throughout different phases, after schematic design, now after design development, and they're based on current market conditions. So we have a better snapshot of what we're dealing with, and we've completed the value engineering exercises. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here in the room, but we want to spell that out on the website to show all of the efforts that have been done, this committee has done, all of the decisions we have made in order to stay on budget. So we're updating the website to show pre-referendum numbers after schematic design, which we approved back in January, and then this meeting. That will include a narrative. It'll include links to the agendas, which has all the information, a clip of the video, because then it gives it context and an explanation for it. So that will all be on the website.
In that narrative, will you guys be clear about we cannot surpass 110 million,
That's
you know,
exactly.
net,
Authorization, yeah.
or the 135.6 overall?
Yes.
Whatever. I think I got that number
In
right.
the
but
intro.
To make sure that,
Absolutely.
yeah, that
To be
in the
clear
end,
about
that this project has to stay within that budget.
Correct. Yeah, and we're gonna spell out, we discussed this at the meeting, the budget breakdown, because we talk about construction cost numbers, and we're looking at the value engineering and what that bottom line is. But people are familiar with 136 or 135 million. So we're trying to just make it all clear and easy to understand, but also show all of the work that has been done and that we still are within our budget.
I think that's is the question, right? Without having been in meetings and in contact and in conversation, as just a community member who's interested to know about the project, and you hear cost is going up, well then why do you keep telling us it's the same number? From a budget perspective, and the immediate reaction is, well then you're probably either taking money from someplace else, or you're gonna come ask us for whatever it is, we gotta get more money. And I think you're right, we have to spell it out very, very clearly. This is what we've been charged to, and this is what we're helping.
It would be nice, because obviously when I'm looking at these posts, I'm very reluctant to get into them because it spirals. But I would drop a link
Correct.
that is
yeah.
the town website that spells it out, right? I don't actually have to say a word, I could just, this is getting crazy, let's throw it in here.
And that's
So
a
that people
resource
can-
for everyone,
Yeah.
that we can have something that, you know, here it is, here's all the information, here's the agendas, here's the actual list of value engineering items we reviewed and approved, instead of speculation and.
That's great.
That, I think that would be, I think it's super helpful, because I think we are hearing things, there's a lot of questions, understandably so. It's a complex process, and if you're not in every one of our meetings, it's hard to follow all that. So I think whatever we can do to simplify it and kind of give people an understanding of the process might help. So, and we'd always, once we do those updates, always looking for feedback, you know, beyond the communications committee. So if anybody happens to go out there and see something and you think we can do that more effectively, if you're hearing a question that we're not answering the right way, please, by all means, come back and we can make adjustments. You guys all know that's seconds to do that kind of work. So, you know, we want to make that as accurate as possible. So. All right, and the other piece to our conversation today was really talking about, which we mentioned before, is an upcoming newsletter. So we did talk about our next newsletter, the content of that, what's going to be included. We have called out some specific questions and answers that will be included in that newsletter, a lot around early enabling. Because of the timing of this newsletter, we're looking towards the end of May for the newsletter to back to households. Also using that newsletter to promote a community meeting that would be a hybrid community meeting, hopefully, is our approach here, where we actually would allow, you know, ask people to come and ask questions to us directly. And like we had done pre-referendum, I think all of us would like to be able to have that opportunity to engage with the community in a way that's meaningful to them. So that's also kind of our path as far as communication is concerned. But mostly it'll be again additional updates on you know, the overall site decisions we've made, upcoming next steps, major milestones, the groundbreaking. Starting to talk to people about that and getting them excited about that piece of information, and always remind people on dates and next steps. So I think that's pretty much high level what we're looking for, and timing around the newsletter. So we're trying to integrate all that communication in what makes sense, you know, and through the summer and into the fall. Any questions or thoughts around that? All right. So we will move on to I don't think we have anything for professional partnerships update report. We haven't met recently as we're working through, obviously, what we're going to be talking about in executive session this evening. So our final report is financial report.
So the only update is on the invoice tracking sheet. A new copy is included with your agenda packet, and that is just updated based on the approvals that are going to happen in the next agenda item.
Questions for Kat? Right, excellent. Thank you very much. That is the end of our report out. So we move on to new business. So for our first order of new business, could I get a motion to approve the invoice package as stated in our agenda?
So moved. No, second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Still there.
Michael, you all right? Muted or?
Yeah, sorry, yes, my vote is in support, correct.
Great, thank you, Michael. Just want to give you an opportunity to extend that. All right, any abstentions? All right, motion carries. Okay, so now we're going to move on to item G2. So this is what we've been referring to throughout our reports. So I'm going to ask for the motion, then we'll actually open it up for discussion, and we'll be having some direction in our conversation through ONG, CSG obviously can help us out as well throughout the conversation. This can be so professional partners as part of this conversation. So could I get a motion to accept the updated cost estimate and approve the updated BE list and alternate list?
So moved.
Second. Okay, I'm going to open it up. And just before we start and get into the detail, just as a reminder to the committee members that are here this evening, this is a repeat of the process that we did back in December into January, where we did our first value engineering exercise. If you remember, that was after our first enhanced schematic design review, where we came, if you remember back all that time ago, it seems like it was so long ago, we did that exercise where we actually took the estimate and then had some recommendations that were presented to us that were passed through our working group, our design working group, and that is obviously comprised of some members here from the building committee, representatives from the town, representatives of the district, a lot of kind of key stakeholders in the project that evaluate and review those recommendations and before they even come to us as a package of recommendations to approve. So we are following exactly the same process here tonight. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that this really is a repeat of the process, and it's really the goal here is taking a look at, okay, now we re-estimated this based on what we know now. Let's take a look at some, as Richard let us know, we were above budget. That is not something we needed to obviously do something about. And that's the conversation we're going to have tonight of what are the recommendations to get us back to budget. And we're going to open that up for conversation and discussion, but it is the list and the estimate that was in your agenda packet prior to you walking in this evening. So it's just more of an open discussion now tonight. Any questions, comments, thoughts around that? So that makes sense to everybody? All right, I don't know who wants to start tonight or start something.
Great, I'm going to start off just actually talking about the estimate, and I think then Mark will jump in and actually go through the PE list and talk to how we came up with those items and those costs and how we got us back on budget. So basically what you see in front of me tonight is our DD estimate. Again, very similar format, not exactly the same format as we did with the SD estimate. We had completed this estimate for about a little bit under 4% over budget, which Again, at this stage of construction, it's not uncommon. It's pretty much what we see on almost all of our projects. And then we work from that point down to get us back on budget. We'll go through that. I just want to point out that one of the things that Kat had mentioned is that this is based on today's dollars. So the numbers that we carried in this estimate is based on fuel pricing today, steel pricing of today, mechanical equipment, all the increases that we've been seeing and reading about are included in this estimate. And then what we do is we actually escalate that number to the actual bid date. So we do add an additional contingency as we consider as to bring those dollars to the current dollars we expect to see at bid time. And we did this in late summer. So I just wanted to kind of point that out and for everybody to understand that. So the estimate itself is broken out. The first section is construction costs. So these are actually the trade costs for the project, the actual hard dollar construction. Again, these numbers are based on constructing that building today in today's market. Okay. The first line item is the site work, and then we break it down to a number of different items here. It's still a little bit different than the SD estimate, and then we have a few more items that we included as separate line items here. But I'll start off with the first item is the early enabling package, and that's the package that's out bid now. We have the site work itself broken out into the high school and the central office. That's lines 1A, 1B and 1C. We have a series of items, actually items D through H, which were items that were not necessarily shown on the DD set, but we understood from the meetings we had with the working group that really should have been part of that document. So what we did was we automatically included that as part of the estimate. So those dollars are covered, and it included going with granite curbing throughout the site. That's something that Russell's very adamant about, including post-tension concrete slabs at the tennis courts. Again, that's the current condition that you have for current construction of the tennis courts now. We want to mimic that in the new project. We have thickened asphalt pavement on site. We want to address any of the underground utilities, so just not capping it and abandoning utilities in place. We want to remove everything from the site that's not active. And then we've also adjusted the elevation of the baseball and tennis courts, which was actually deducted in this particular case. But these are items again that we, as working with the working group and Tyson Kim and CSG, really understood this really were part of the project. They needed to be part of the project. Something that we didn't want to take away from the overall site work. The next slide on it was our abatement and demo. Again, this includes the hazardous waste removal from the building, from the existing high school, as well as taking the building down. It does leave the existing 1920 building in place, intact. We're not touching that, but all the other parts of the building, parts of the existing high school, are coming down and are reflecting the cost. And then we have the new construction, which is item 3, building construction. We have it broken out by the high school and the renovation of the 90s or 900 wing rather, and central office. The last item of that's under the construction here is accepted DE items. That's line item 4. Again, we have marked here as accepted DE. Technically, it hasn't been accepted until the committee reviews them and approves them tonight. But we did again include the values, those values that we present later on, to really just to get us back on budget and show us, giving you a path on how we're going to get there. The next section is our reversible costs. These are pretty much fixed costs that was contractual from with our contract. And then the contingencies, which are something that's probably worth talking about a little bit here. Our first contingency we're hearing is actually design estimate contingency. So at this point, we are working with a set of design development documents. They're not fully complete at this point. Richard and his team are still working on documents, as he mentioned. So what we do is we carry an estimate, we carry a contingency within our estimate to cover completing those documents from today's docs that we used to prepare this estimate to when the documents are actually going to be finished. So we carry an extra contingency in there to cover anything that we might not pick up in the estimate that Richard needs to put into the documents. It could be mechanical, electrical items, it could be architectural finishes that weren't reflected in the set. So we're out carrying dollars here to really finish the drawings. So that's something we do with every one of our estimates. By the time that we go out to bid, that value basically just gets rolled up into the trade costs. So it is true dollars that will be spent for the project. It's not really a contingency that will be left, once we start construction. It does get absorbed into the trade costs once we've completed our final estimate.
I think we just wanted to point out that in that design contingency line item, that's eventually dollars that get rolled up into the construction costs. So at the time of our construction documents are complete, that percentage goes to zero, and those dollars get rolled up. So it doesn't add to the cost or reduce the cost. It's really those design elements. Eventually, we look to the design contingency as opposed to BE items, right? At that point, to say, and then make up that goes rolled up into the construction costs.
The next contingency we're carrying is the escalation. And that's something that Richard had mentioned and we had mentioned as well. This is what we are predicting the cost of the trade costs will be at bid time. So again, we are figuring, the estimate is based on figuring the dollars today, so we're going to put a shovel in the ground today. But since we are bidding the job in August, not starting until the fall, we have to project or estimate what those costs will be at that point. Right now, we are carrying an 8% escalation annually. We don't have a full year until bid time, so we're carrying 3.67% of that 8% annual rate as an escalation for those trade costs. And again, yes, and we'll point out the same thing. It does roll up into trade costs. So when we do go out to bid, we're going to give you a breakdown of all the trade costs and what we expect those costs to come in at bid time. That escalation, as well as design estimate, design contingency, will be rolled up into those numbers. So it is truly not a contingency that will be carried forward for construction. It would be absorbed at bid time. The next two sections really are just, again, contractual fees, the CMPs, and our CM bond and insurance. So looking at the very bottom line, variance row, we're currently a little over $1 million under budget on the high school project. We're a little over still on the Board of Ed building. And for the total project, we're about $500,000 under budget based on, again, the VE that we've already done to date that we will review it. Now that number may change if the committee decides not to approve one of the VE items that we're suggest tonight, but right now we are in a good position to move the project forward. So. Any questions with that? All the numbers and stats are out there. So.
As you're carrying an 8% per year, obviously prorated 3.67. Before this craziness has been happening over the last 12 or 18 months, would you have carried less than that 8% per year? I think Richard mentioned something like 4, so you're almost double.
Yeah, 3 to 4% probably back in 20. I mean back in 20 just before COVID.
Okay.
And then it's been kind of going up, 2%, plus per year. So we are carrying, 8% right now, and it's on the high side of 8%.
Okay. And anecdotally, I guess, hopefully not, but for our business of residential, I remember having some very early discussions with Richard saying things are absolutely nuts and you haven't seen it yet. There's almost like a little bit of a delay from the residential sector to the commercial sector. We've seen not a drop off of price increases, I'll be real clear. The drop off in the amount and the rate of the price increases and as they're coming. Have you guys seen a little bit of that on the commercial side, or are you still seeing weekly price increases on items?
We're still seeing weekly price increases. On the majority of the items, but on some of the major components of a building,
And do you think that's fuel driven, or is that still just increases like we saw lumber last year really go up and then it kind of leveled off, came back down and went back up a little bit? We saw steel start to spike somewhere around this time last year. And are you still seeing those big spikes?
We're seeing it in the mechanical. I just read a memo just the other day on mechanical piping, copper, even steel piping, it's gone up 20-30% over the last 60 to 90 days.
I saw some
So-
drywall.
Right. It's I think, yeah, it's just not the fuel
Not
price
strictly
increases. It's happened, prior to that, and it's prior to the war. But I think it's still we're still feeling the effects of COVID and the supply chain issues that's created.
Thank you.
Should we wait until the prices drop back down?
My recommendation would be no.
Yeah, my recommendation would be no. I'm sort of playing the devil's advocate. Out there, someone might be saying, let's wait until the prices drop, and I think that would be not wise.
No, because you do have normal escalation every year, right?
Right.
So at what point do you?
Right.
You
And
know,
so
decide to
part of the
start that
problem,
project again?
part of the problem with delay is that you're incurring increases. And so you're kind of chasing that as the more you
It's
wait.
like trying to play the stock market.
Exactly. So build it as soon as you can. Right. I have another comment that I would ask. We kind of kicked it around a little bit during our many discussions about cutting costs is procurement delays. We have been seeing significant procurement delays. Anybody who's ordered anything that has a digital circuit in it has to wait months and months. Or now I'm seeing pumps for some reason, or motors having to wait months and months. So we've just successfully gotten the state to approve phase one. Phase one was never part of the project in the beginning. It was added, and it was a recommendation by ONG, it was a good recommendation to do phase one improvements on the site when students aren't there. Makes all the sense in the world. State approved that. Why can't the state approve early procurement? I've asked this question before, and so far I've received that there's the response was there's no mechanism for the state to approve plans and specs for early procurement of mechanical systems, for example. Why not? I think because of these extraordinary times, someone should press the state for these kinds of early packages. That's my recommendation.
I said we're calling it a phase, right?
You call it a phase. It's a phase of the project, just like FF&E is a phase of the project. You will be getting plans and specs for FF&E in the future, and we're going to go through approval of that with the state. Why not an early package for construction?
The one thing I can say as far as the supply chain issues, what helps probably the most is really having an open spec, right? And having the ability to submit on, let's just say drywall, for instance, giving us the ability to submit on 3 or 4 different drywall suppliers or vendors, so that when we do start construction, we got the option of going to, company A, B, or C, provide materials for the job. We've done that in the past on some other projects recently that's been very successful. So just something to think about that our PM is here tonight. So something that, as we're starting to process submittals to get maybe 2 or 3 different drywall, suppliers submitted at that time, just get it approved. So that, again, when we start construction, if we have a delay in getting drywall from one supplier, we go to supplier B and get the material for that quick. Some of the bigger equipment, again, having an open spec where like switchgear, we have 2 or 3 different manufacturers listed, so that the contractors can go out and look to find the guy that can get the material, on site when we need it. So, and we worked with you guys before in the past on some recent projects as well, making that happen. So that's really something that we can do now and be proactive and making sure that we have to go on some.
Or is that something you need from us as a building committee approval to take that approach?
No, it's something that as a team here that we work through, as a specs, as specs being developed and as our teams work in the field together to make that happen, so.
As you're reviewing the design development transitions, structure documents really looking for specifications for
That's
vendors.
correct.
And that will be a requirement there for all. Trying to do procurement early on some equipment has its downsides too, so it's something that we can discuss for recommendation. We see it, but when we start locking in, not every subcontractor procures from every vendor. And every bid contractor has a competitive bid going in based on their relationships with their suppliers. And they're contractually bound by the schedule that they're bidding on. Intervene and start supplying them with equipment and take on that responsibility. You also limit, so you're telling contractor A, you are going to be handed a product B, which you don't normally work with. Maybe your vendor is different. So you take some of that bid market. So there's a trade-off.
The challenge, I mean, the Richard's point though, is the state really has not moved to that process. You know, and unfortunately, I've looked over the roof right now.
Exactly. For insulation.
We have a list of things that we would like to order, but it just, we need to follow that state process so that we are, you know, city or town's reimbursable.
Well, obviously, we're looking for guidance and for further conversations with you guys on what makes most sense, where our opportunities are.
Again, and the last thing I want to point out too is, again, this is our DD estimate. You know, we will be doing one more estimate. You know, we are CD estimates, so that Richard mentioned earlier. So again, we'll have the ability to again look at the current pricing. You know, Johnny's point to make sure that we are, you know, still are within budget, that we're still following, you know, the current market trends and taking account, you know, those numbers in the estimate, and then again making those adjustments to the value engineering if needed, or some of these other percentages for escalation as well. So we're not there yet. So
Still a little more work.
still at the DD
Just a
level.
little bit, a little work. Any questions for Barb? Yeah, Sam.
Pick the other part, but owner's contingency, are we budgeting for that now, or are we planning to roll that out of the other contingencies that we have?
So we haven't touched owner's contingency or FF&E or technology or any of those numbers yet.
So
So those are separate. Those are, so you've got 115, let's call it 115.6 for construction costs. But we are, you know, the balance between that and 135 million is design fee costs and professional fees, but then all of the contingencies and FF&E pickup. So those numbers not touched yet.
No, we were just, for the communication committee, when we start off with explaining the costs, I think we just need all of that broken down to get to the 135, including reimbursement from the state. You know, I see it as like a visual.
We have a chart that we use.
Yeah,
to
like
reference.
central office and FHS, just so we kind of start off with, like, this is what was approved. This is how it breaks down in construction costs, and FF&E and contingency, and all of those things, just because I do think these numbers would be confusing at times to the community, because they remember, like Kat said, 135 million. Where are you getting this 115? Where are you where are you getting these numbers from? So I think a simple chart to kind of start everyone off, like, okay, everyone, this is what the budget is.
Yeah.
We're staying within this budget, and this is how it plays out in all those different areas.
And then highlight construction costs. And here's where the.
And
escalation
here's the
is.
explanation of construction costs and how we're, going through the process of that.
I think what would also be helpful is how much of it could be borne by the town, like when there's a reimbursable. So all 135 is not on the town, right? So I think that should be
Yeah, so let the state reimburse.
correct.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
think it is another reminder, we talked so much about some of these numbers, but it was a while ago when we really looked at it as a total picture. We've been so focused on construction costs, it's good for us to kind of recenter it. That's a good idea.
Referendum, as we revise that.
Yeah, I can see the.
I can too, I can even see the color.
chart.
I can't
Multiple
too.
color
I
lines.
started putting
Yeah,
it
and I'm like,
together.
that exists. So I think, yeah, that'll be a great addition, I think, for people to see that. See the whole view. All right, any other, that was helpful, Mark, thank you.
Yeah, okay, so again, based on this estimate, we are a little over $500,000 under budget, but that's based on line item 4 there, which is our accepted PE items.
Yep,
And
which
again,
is the
accepted
next step.
in our eyes, they're accepted, but they're not, they haven't been,
Correct,
nor
yeah.
provided by the
This is
other.
the view,
So,
this would be the view to have us in budget.
Correct.
basically, that's
So-
what gave us.
Right.
So our job now is to take a look at everything that's included under that item 4. And again, like everybody again, this has been, pre-evaluated, reviewed. These have been discussed at length. So I don't want you to think these are the first time anybody's actually evaluated or looked at these items, but it's important for us as a committee to understand these and, make sure that we have clarification before we go ahead and do any kind of approval. So. Mark?
Yes. Great, thank you, Devin. Just really quick, want to again reiterate this has been a tremendous collaborative effort on the professional team. Want to thank the professional team for all their time and energy that we put into this, and the building committee and the working group and everybody else that's been involved to get us to this point. This is very similar to what we did the first go around. The list, it was based on some of the same categories. So if you look at the list, you'll see that, categories A, B, C, D, and then we had G. So we had some in there that just, there were no BE items impacted. So we took them off the list. We wanted to keep a clean list. This first list that we're going to look at, these are items that were reviewed and we're calling approved by the working group to move forward to the building committee. This is the dollars that make up that that base bid reduction that gets you to that very bottom 2 base bid under budget, that 511 that Mark was sharing in the budget. So these efforts are, all of these numbers, all of these items are things that will be extracted from the base bid, so they'll no longer be in the project. And then we have a separate list that we're going to talk about, the alternates, that if bidding is favorable, we can choose from this menu of items that we'd like to put back into the base bid, should the project be able to afford it. So we looked at substructure, the exterior of the building, the interior of the building, services and site work, and then we had sort of a mix of items that were carried over for schematic design. So the first item is eliminate moisture vapor barrier, reducing admixture from the concrete. So this is a vapor barrier chemical that's in the concrete itself. It's an admix that gets blended with the concrete as it gets poured, and what it does is it reacts with the moisture in the ground and prevents it from penetrating up through the slabs. The base bid already includes a system, a moisture barrier system that gets applied over the earth and below the concrete application. I felt that this was a redundant item and carried this over as a not needed to carry in our base bid. So we'll go through this whole list and then go to questions, you think? Yeah.
I think so. I think you can do them pretty briefly.
Sure.
And maybe just say quick and then any questions on them or after.
Very good. So the next set of items were the exterior of the building. We looked at the roofing material, changing from a plastic base to a rubber based TPDM, same warranties. Felt that this was an easy item to select. There were guardrails that were shown on the back landing of the stairwell, so nothing that impacts anyone walking up the stairs. These are just guardrails that we felt were not required as part of the job. It should have probably just a carryover from another project, and so we chose to eliminate those guardrails. You heard Richard talk a little bit about percentages, skylights, and things like that. So we've identified with the professional team that 20% of skylights that could be reduced from the building wouldn't affect the natural light or the effect that they were looking for. And so we agreed to a 20% reduction of skylights and eliminating the round skylights at the gym. inside the building. So the interior, we looked at reducing the overall interior glass. We recognize there is a lot of glass in that building for a lot of great reasons, but felt that we could reduce that overall interior glass area. I think the number was 10%. And then the next one was to delete wall tile at the CMU and epoxy paint in the locker rooms. So this item is to take out. You've already got a hard surface CMU wall in the locker rooms. With epoxy paint, you get the same effect as you would putting tile over already a hard surface wall. So that was just in the locker rooms to take that out. We talked about replacing the tecton blades and baffles. These next couple of this next item has to do with acoustical ceiling tiles in is this in the art space? I believe
This is in the art classrooms,
yeah,
yes.
in the art classrooms. The base bid carried these sort of floating clouds of ceiling tiles, and this is to I'm sorry, they have these tecton blades and baffles that were deflecting sound, and we're going to go with a different option that provides the same effect with these acoustical ceiling tile clouds. The last one was adjust spray fireproofing and intumescent estimate. We recognize that some of these exposed columns did not identify fireproofing on those exposed steel columns, and we needed to make sure we had an intumescent paint. So this was an add to make sure we had that back into the program. The next one in services, eliminate air conditioning from the existing team rooms. There's no AC in those team rooms now, but we're going to retain the existing ductwork and any minimal renovations to existing team rooms. So this was 113,000 that came out of that section. The site work changes, we went from pavers to concrete, made sense with town engineering. Easier to maintain the concrete, and they'll take the wear and tear more than the actual brick pavers. Reduce the overall concrete sidewalk areas. So this item and the next item are talking about reducing the square footage of sidewalks. So we may reduce the actual width, maybe not necessarily the sidewalks themselves, and then reducing some of those concrete walks and changing them from concrete to bituminous. Which is blacktop. The last one is eliminate the baseball field in its entirety. So that's clearing of basically the ball field, that practice field, taking that out and replacing it with a grass field. So those are the items there. The additional BE items carried over. These are the horizontal shades. So the exterior building, there are 2 horizontal shades at each classroom to prevent the sun from penetrating into those windows. We feel we can go to 1 and get the same effect. Reduce the, the next item was deduct the porcelain tiles for the 1x2 linoleum tiles in the lobbies and corridors. So this is to change from porcelain to linoleum. There are decorative wood ceilings that are in the corridors. This is a change to eliminate those wood ceilings and go with a acoustical tile in those corridors. And then number 4, deduct those drywall board soffits in the stairwells under the stringers and landings. And the next one is deduct the ground face CMU for the partitions and high traffic wall coverings. So basically this is changing out the ground face block to sheetrock with a high traffic wall covering on that sheetrock to avoid any damage to those walls. And then the last one is change all of the lockers to sort of a half size as opposed to full size lockers. And so those were all the items that we totaled up to a base bid reduction of $4.8 million. We had a $4.3 million over budget challenge. This would solve that over budget variance and provide us with a new base bid under budget of a little over $500,000. I'd like to go to the next list and then we can open it up because there is some correlation between the two. So this next list is we're calling approved alternates. These are alternates that we've identified as opportunities to bring back in. They were items that we felt were good items and would be important to the school if we could afford them. So we'd like to put back in given the opportunity that bidding is favorable, one of those horizontal shade window types we would want to put back into the project. We would want to add the porcelain tile back in for that 1x2 linoleum in the lobbies and the corridors. We'd like to add the wood ceilings back in, given the opportunity. Add the drywall soffits in the stairwells under the stringer and landings. We would want to go back to a ground-based CMU block in the corridors and there's an add here to go back to full-size lockers. There's another ad here for operable windows, which currently are not shown, but this would be a premium for an operable window versus the fixed window that's in the base bid. The last one would be to add back the ball field work in its entirety. So put the ball field back in that location should the project be able to afford it. The last item is really just a holding, a placeholder for credit backs. So should things move forward or things change with those existing gyms or the 1928 building, considering getting pricing to help facilitate the discussions for deducted the demolition of those gyms. So they would stay in place and they would come out of the base bid, and then potential maybe relocate the tennis courts in that area, but this is really just a placeholder at that time for possible add alternate should things clear. So you've got about $3.5 million in add alternate subtotals. This could be considered a menu to prioritize above should funding come back or be favorable, or we see some of those contingencies move back up where there's dollars left. Then we're going to look at those and then go back to this list and say, what do we want to add back into the project that makes the most sense for Farmington High School.
Any points of clarification on a couple of things. So number 9 on the list, can you just do a quick explanation for us why it's important that we have that item on there?
Sure. So we did talk about this a little bit, somewhat at length, and actually, do you want to talk a little bit about why it's important to have that stuff now as opposed to trying to chase it later?
Sure.
You do a great job.
We'll try. We understand that there is, as you open the meeting up, with some potential for some changes here on the campus. We don't know what's going to happen in your committee meetings and as you're doing your analysis. So there's a potential that you could come back to this project and say, we don't want to deduct some of these existing buildings. There's a program to reuse some of the space. But we want to make sure we're able to capture that credit at bid time, so that if you come back to us and say, okay, we're going to leave a gymnasium as an example, we want to be able to capture when it's competitive at the bid time, what it's worth not to demolish that section of the building, so that you can get a full credit for choosing that later on. The project, as it's laid out, requires those gyms to come down, but not for the construction of the new building, but for your extended campus work. So we want to make sure that we give you all the options at bid time, so that you get the best cost effectiveness when we think we can, which is when you have all of your leverage at bid time. So we did a little bit of a what if session. If you chose to proceed forward, what are those areas that we want to capture the cost? And it included maybe a different location for the tennis courts. If you don't take the gyms down, there may be a more cost-effective place to place the tennis courts. So you would always have the tennis courts, it's always going to be part of the program, but we may move it. And if we can move it, it will probably cost less money. So we wanted to capture that. So really, this is providing you with the ability to make a decision later after the bid, and to give you the ability to capture the true value. Rather than negotiating with one side, we're basically getting a number from all of the bidders, which we'll know at bid time for exchanges. And then have it established, but also give your committee some hard numbers to know going forward. So that's the purpose.
Does that make sense, everybody? It's just something a little bit different. There's a couple things we're going to talk about. That one I wanted to make sure really what we're looking for here and what we've asked the professional partners is flexibility. Like we know we have some things in flux here, we acknowledge that. We want to do what's in the best interest, certainly of the building committee project and support other initiatives that are going on in the town to the best of our ability. How do we do that in the best way is to remain as flexible as possible and do that in a way that our professional partners have suggested that's going to make the most sense to us. So I just wanted to make sure this one looks different. Obviously, you see TBD there, and from a cost perspective, we don't know. But I think, from an approach perspective, I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with that thought process and why we're kind of looking at this from a just flexible as we possibly can be and being really smart about some decisions up front.
Without being confusing.
Without being confusing, right? Exactly.
So.
We're just gonna be
and
honest as possible, you know that.
This is something that we discussed at working group, obviously.
Yeah.
And what Michael was saying is that, if they go to bid and they're all due on August 1st, and you don't tell them that it potentially can be done, and you go back later, they can say, well, there's really no savings. And I'm exaggerating the situation, obviously. So that because the projects this is a project that's in place, this one we have no idea. But if this one does go forward for some reason, they are completely separate things, but the credits would come back to the high school, not getting incorporated and blurring the lines between this and that.
Right.
So it is tough to follow. That explanation was good.
Yes.
And I mean, even when we were discussing it, was it last, I can't keep track of it.
Last week.
It was circling and trying to make sure that it's clear. So it is giving the flexibility on this end to allow for every opportunity on the other end, whether it's nothing or something.
Thank you.
Just add on one thing.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, we're doing all add alternates 1 through 8. This last one would only be D dollars, right? These
Yes.
aren't D dollars.
Correct.
The 1 through 8 is a better one, if you will. That's the word you want to use. This one is just like price, just get the price.
Right, it's for pricing purposes only, is
Correct.
kind of the conversation we
Not
had to give us, again, the best view, the best flexibility.
Right, so in your base bid, the demo will be included.
Yeah.
But if you choose not.
Yeah, that's a good clarification.
Yeah, thank you.
The base bid is demolition
Right.
of what has always been
Correct.
described. But, like I think you phrased it the other last week, this is a costing exercise, right? To give us that information for flexibility.
And yes, but again, that we prepared tonight, that shared with you tonight, includes the demolition of the entire high school except for the 1920 building. As part of the project.
As the base, as we've always talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
So to reiterate, you'll get the cost information now when we have the bid, when it's competitive. O&G schedule will always track when decisions have to be made, but obviously the demolition is after the construction of the new high school. It's sort of a simple thing, but I want to make sure. There's a lot of time between bids being received and when that decision needs to be made for this project. So there's time for your group to analyze what you might and not want to. But we want to give you that leverage now.
That makes sense to everybody.
It does.
Right there.
I just want to say that we need to do some editing of the language here for the sake of clarity, because I think this list has been rewritten and rewritten and rewritten, and every time somebody writes it, it's tweet. And I just, so I don't want you to, I want you to approve the intent, not the words, okay?
Were we okay with that?
Yeah, in
I'm very, because I agree with you.
Yeah.
the note for this motion, in the note for the motion included in the agenda packet, we wanted to allow that flexibility. So the items that include TBD will be updated by the working group and professional partners as information becomes available. So with that note, you are approving that intent.
I just think some of this language is confusing
It
and
is.
not what we intended. So I agree that it just has to be cleaned up a bit. I also just want to be really like thinking back. Did we have other add alternates not on this list?
The last
I'm saying, like, I'm thinking,
We started off with,
like, from the beginning, we've had add alternates. Are we continuing with those other add alternates that were, I just, O&G, I think, did you put this together? I don't know if you were here with other add alternates before you came on board. So I just want to make sure this is everything that we had voted on over time. I just have memories of like a gym.
We had, we
There were other things.
It was
Yeah,
an
but
anti-graffiti
they were things
sealer, I
that were
believe.
alternate and there were things that were rejected or approved.
No, but this is pre-referendum.
That's what I'm saying.
In like January, February 2020, we came to the committee with about 4 items. It was like stone in lieu of masonry, gym partition, anti-graffiti sealer, maybe one. I have a weird.
There were. And then the catwalk.
Catwalk was the last round.
So I just want to make sure when we're
All
doing
of
this,
them.
that there are other items that over time, this committee.
No.
No?
They're not. I think, well, through this process,
Okay.
we weaned out a lot of things that are no longer relevant. So for example, the catwalk, we ended up with only one catwalk. Only one catwalk is required. A second catwalk is not required. So why spend the money to add an alternate for
Okay, so
that?
that's probably a bad example.
Yeah, that's a bad example. Okay, so
However, there are others that are good examples.
okay, so the stone base of the building is completely eliminated. We're not going back to that as an add alternate. It's out. So it's all brick at this point.
Well, yes, we
Okay.
made that. We made clear that.
How about the gym?
But you're right. So, but you're right. It was at one point discussed as an alternate, but that's been eliminated. The gym issue had to do with a operable wall between the main gym and the auxiliary gym. To do an operable wall, I think at some point in the process, we calculated that it was worth $500,000 because it has to be structurally supported. It just isn't warranted. And I think the decision by the users was, we'd rather have solid walls in the auxiliary gym. And that's the way the drawings are representing that. So that alternate was eliminated. The anti-graffiti alternate was eliminated when we made the choice between durable wall covering versus glazed masonry, or polished masonry, right? Polished steel, neither of which requires anti-graffiti coating. So that alternate was eliminated as well.
So when the committee then voted on add alternate, it was, these things came off without a vote of taking them off. They just came off.
Through the design.
Through the list that you approved. So when things came off the list, that means they're no longer on. I just want to make sure that we are being thorough in the different iterations of value engineering and add alternates that we've done. And there have been a few iterations of that. So from like the historic view, and again, it just came to mind, I'm like, are there other ones? I'm not, that's a great explanation. Some just went away when the design became more developed.
Right.
But I just want to make sure that, when we approve this, just making sure we look back and make sure that there's nothing that we're missing on this list that might be an alternate from the past.
We'll look back one more time, but I am very confident that all of the others were eliminated. These are the only alternates I think that are on the table.
Okay, this is subject to change again at the next estimate.
Yeah,
Don't
we
get me
can just
started.
one more time.
Right.
So let's just be clear. The estimate has been reconciled. We have sat with the design team, we have sat with the construction manager, we have completely reconciled the estimate. Any conflict between the two entities regarding a perspective of how many square feet of this, or how many square feet of that, or what's this space gonna look like, this is how I estimated it, this is how I'm gonna complete the drawings. They work together, and I compliment both organizations for working together. Based on that process, we got a reconciled estimate that was a bit over budget. So in order to solve that problem, we sat back down with the design professionals and the user team to come up with a path forward to be in budget. This simple list that we presented represents a lot of complicated meetings to determine what would allow you to maintain the program and still balance your budget, still be on budget. So this alternate list is those things that you would like to have back, but you don't have money for it at this stage of the project. none of your other program requirements, or none of your program requirements have been removed from the project. They have maintained all of the requirements that they've been given for the building. These alternates are things that would be an enhancement, but doesn't affect program. You haven't reduced your classroom sizes, you haven't reduced your meeting space, you haven't given up gym space, but you've made the space affordable. And when the bids come in, if there is savings, then you can tell us which one would be, you'd like to put back into the project. And we'll, again, capture those costs in the competitive bid process so that we're not going back out to a bidder and saying, well, we think we'd like to add back in some wood ceilings. How much would that be? You'll have that alternate at bid time when all of the contractors are bidding against each other competitively, so that when we receive the bids together, you'll be able to make those decisions.
I think Kathy, to your point too, that you thought that maybe there was other items that you might be able to choose from that maybe we had missed in the process that might have been really in the approved item as opposed to alternate item. So that, we hear you, we'll go back to the list.
Yeah, I think it's just.
So Mark, a good example would be that gym wall. We had discussed that at length in the gymnasium planning meetings, and we had asked, I think we were waiting to see some samples that were used in other parts of the state or on a college campus for that, but our impression was that that would be on the alternate list based on the discussion that we had. Again, just trying to see what it looks like or see it in action somewhere else too, so we can make some decisions around its viability in the high school, if and when that were an option.
All right, but we're getting different messages. The users of the gym indicated that they did not want an operable wall, that they wanted the auxiliary gym to have fixed.
Well, it's because they've never seen one, Richard. So when we asked Randall, who's in charge of building the gym or designing the gym, to give us an example, we haven't seen one yet. So I think that's what the hope was, to go see it and then assess its viability.
Okay, well, that's a problem because that adds another alternate, an expensive one.
Potentially, but it already exists as something we've discussed as an alternate. So if we come back to the table with the pros and cons of that alternate, perhaps that's something that is taken off based on the cost versus the value.
Yeah. So how can we proceed with this? Should we add that at the next time?
Before we arbitrarily add or subtract anything, then we need to go back and visit maybe some of the minutes of what we had, because all our memories obviously are going back now a year or so with a lot of discussions. And, I remember hearing a lot of discussion around, well, it's not worth it at this point. It just seems like it's going to be too expensive. We're already going to be up against budget constraints. So I think we should go back and maybe look at some of the minutes, figure out what those, maybe those core items were that maybe we need to be refreshed on. And then maybe some of those can get added at maybe the next meeting. But I don't think we want to sit here and start arbitrarily trying to throw things out. I think maybe your suggestion of going back and checking those previous lists and making sure that we officially voted on them or officially did it, to make sure that we're on the same page.
I mean, my comments are just, I want everything to be accurate. I want everything to reflect what we had talked about over the last how many years. And, it's not to create an issue at this point. It's more to be clear about what we have voted on in the past. Maybe none of those things come back on the list, but I do think it's worth taking a look back and just double checking.
As an alternate, it doesn't affect what the bottom line is right now.
Right, exactly.
And it should be, these lists were created at one point before they were just alternates. They were approved or rejected, and there was graphs along the way that would be in the minutes. That should be fairly easy to follow.
Okay.
Yeah, and we literally, I think there were 4 referendums.
Yeah,
And it was like, and there were, and our last BE exercise, if we had a Excel chart that had the columns,
Yeah, so
Remember
it
that?
should be in there.
So
Yeah.
whatever we approved out of the meeting, if that is in the add alternate column, I just think we just need to look at that whole list and say, you know, probably a lot of these things are on them. I think actually a lot of.
They
a couple
are,
of
I already
the-
did it while we were meeting.
Yeah.
1 through 6 are on that one. The only ones that I found were catwalk, which we had talked in the design process, and change half concrete sidewalks to bitumen.
Well, and that's what I'm saying in the past.
And it might be in the, yeah.
Yes, I think a couple of the add alternates have gotten and were added back in.
Yeah.
Based on, right, if I understand that correctly, in item 1, I think some of those were what we had at one point then on our add alternate list.
Well, it was a consideration that we may have projected that got put into the design as it's going in and that's it. Because we start going back, I mean, we talked about green roofs.
Yeah.
We talked about geothermal and all kinds of stuff that we were throwing around in the very early stages before even ONG was here, that we were somewhat trying to get a consensus on, that we may have not done an official vote on, but so we need to go back to the estimates and the list that we brought up from the very, at least when we started getting some hard costs on it.
Like,
And then just verifying that we didn't miss anything.
yeah,
and
I think what was in, we were very clear, I believe, in the presentation for our recommendation to town council. Like, we looked at that presentation, it was very clear, this is in scope, this is out of scope.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, based on that conversation, that is, I think, our baseline.
Yeah.
Before that, we're gonna get dicey. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? I
agree.
think
No,
it's
I agree.
at
I agree.
the
I agree.
point
That's
when
my
you
point.
get, and
I
I
can
think,
start going back to the last building.
And we did have a formal vote at the building committee in early 2020 to revise the estimate based off, there was the reduction with those add alternates, and then
yes,
our professional partners each had a reduction in their fees at that point also.
so I think it's really that baseline moving forward,
Yeah,
making sure
agreed.
we understand the full add alternate list. And what you're probably gonna see, where it's gonna make us most comfortable with, even if it's gone, just tell us then it's gone because of this thing. Because
Yeah.
and then we're level set, we're all clear and comfortable, and then, you know, then I don't think it's gonna affect our conversation this evening, because we're the add alternate list we're talking about.
Right.
But I think that would be good for a good exercise for us.
One final list that urges the.
Yes,
development.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. So can I ask someone to compile this list? of-
I know where all of
You
that
do,
information is.
all right, that's super.
It's in my head now, but I know.
You're covered up on it.
Okay, that would be great.
Oh, wow.
So I think that's something we could probably bring back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can have that, I mean, outside of the conversation,
Correct.
right, and evaluation of that, does that make sense at our next meeting?
That's the target.
To just make sure everybody's clear and we level set on all that, that could be helpful. Okay, the other item I wanted to make sure that we brought up, and then I want to make sure we get comments, questions from the committee, whatever we're still in conversation here about, and in discussion is that item that we have on here, which is G110, which is talks about eliminating the baseball field. So obviously, this is a large item. This is a topic of conversation that was, these are certainly not easy conversations, and that these are, I think we all recognize that these are going to get more difficult the farther we get along in the process. But this is one that really came up for discussion and really evaluation and looking at opportunities for us, and was something that was presented and reviewed, as you see there, as a cost savings for us. Again, you see it also reflected as the alternate list as well. So this is an opportunity for us to say, we understand this is a cost savings, it's an opportunity. Not an easy decision by any means. I think for any of us, as we have it on our plate now to present, to actually take a vote on. But I think it's real. It's a real conversation we have to have, and make sure that consideration is part of our conversation and part of our vote, understanding that we do have it on that alternate list moving forward. So, yeah, go ahead.
That was on my list of, I just have a couple questions, but any context for that? I don't, where did this come from in discussion? And, I feel like I may have missed a meeting.
No, it was at the working group.
Now, in the working group meetings, there's a lot of ideas thrown around, but a lot of it is stemmed from the partners bringing
Sure.
ideas, let's say, is the best way to put it. And then we were working through those ideas. This is one that we discussed, and that, like you said, I can't reiterate enough that it was a very tough recommendation from the working group even to hear. My feeling is that, you know, the numbers that we're looking at are big. If you look at the line items we're deducting, that is one of the major ones that gets us to where we need to be. And my philosophy, at least this is personally, I can't speak on behalf of the working group, is we save programmatic stuff at all costs, and then we start looking elsewhere, finishes and things. And to me, this is something that could be done down the road. The land is still there because we have no idea what will happen with 1920 and all that. We wanted to A, look at it as a potential, because that could be something that happens, but B, if it is eliminated because we don't see any cost savings through the bidding process, then it is something that can be added later on. And it's not going to affect what we're here to do, which is build a new high school and make sure that the kids in the curriculum and all that are intact. And the last thing I'll say is to not consider that some of the other items that are maybe are not even on this list that we either approved or rejected were worse in my eyes than what we're seeing here. So it's hard to rehash the many discussions that we had.
That's not really.
But that's the consideration.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I feel your pain, I get that, as much as I could without being there. But does that mean that the FHS campus could potentially not have a baseball field? I know we have one at Census Mead that's kind of like the varsity field, but then what happens? I know this one gets heavy use.
Yeah, that is a potential, that there would not be a ball field on the FHS campus. We did refer back to the ed specs, and it does say, in addition, the existing tennis courts, baseball and softball fields, which are impacted by the proposed location of the new facility, shall be replaced in kind, provided allowable area permits. So I think that's part of where it came down to too, is like Johnny said, the programmatic value inside the building or outside the building. It's not an easy decision, but it would mean a ball field is not on the campus.
And that we're down one.
Overall, yeah. But then also, right, they're rebuilding one at IAR for the
temporary location.
Correct.
So we could end up, if that's maintained long-term, because that's may or may
That's
not be in the cards right now or in the plan.
And also remember, it's not like it disappears. There's still a grass area over there. Like, just like the parking lot is taking up an area that they used to do, I think, lacrosse and a couple other things that they use it for, there's still an area, it just wouldn't be configured as a ball field with irrigation.
Right, it's not usable. It's not like in the program. It's not, in scheduling, I'm thinking like the athletics department and scheduling and hosting games, and just kind of to the same level prior to construction. Okay.
In the beginning, we looked at a number
Next year one, I will try.
we looked at a number of options, and it's been a while, but we looked at a variety of things. And we looked at creating 2 ball fields.
Right.
As well as tennis courts, and we reported to this committee at some point in the past, you can't have it all if you add the 1928 building. In fact, we recommended that the 1928 building be removed because you can't fit everything, like 2 ball fields, tennis courts, and the 1928.
That's when we lost the softball I'm saying, but the softball field went.
That's correct.
Yes,
That's correct.
I
When
remember
the council said, no, we want to save the 1928 building, something had to go. And given the way the ed specs were written, something had to go. So if bids are favorable, and if the 1928 committee does not want to salvage the auditorium and the gymnasium, then you could consider putting the ball field back.
And it becomes part of the conversation, like you said, of this list ultimately that we're gonna prioritize, depending on what we have available to us, it gets prioritized with all these other items.
Right.
Based on cost and everything else, but it's a tough one. It's kind of probably the first real tough one
The
that we
big
have on
chunk,
our plate. That's a pretty big change, something we talked about. So I just wanted to make sure to call that one out. I'm sure people were going to do it anyways, but make sure we have that conversation because it's an important one for us.
And it's, to try to be extremely clear, not to mix. And there's no 1928 committee yet, just be careful. But the council also has a separate committee running on ARPA funds, and it has to be used towards capital projects. And so that 1928 discussion gets into that. Well, if, and again, huge what if everything fails and we tear everything down and it's all there, well, capital money is got to go somewhere. It could be to another school, but it could be to a ball field. There's so many different tentacles to this thing. It's crazy. And again, I go back to my earlier comments of, pick your worst one, like there's no great deduction here. Never is. That's why this one was a tough one.
Yeah.
What's the net impact on the athletic department or the teams? How does it expect?
Whatever we do to change things, it can be more transportation costs to get students to, like, say, the IAR field on a regular basis. So we had a lot of discussion about anything we do with value engineering that creates more maintenance means more custodians. So we've tried to be really, I think, thoughtful throughout the process that we don't want to do things now that then have cost implications for our town later on. So I think some things didn't get into value engineering because of the additional maintenance costs that we would incur over time. And, there is some cost here because usually students would just go out to the ball field, but now we have to transport them somewhere for practice. And, for other, I think junior varsity games that we would have there. So it definitely has some impact. But I think given where we are, it's probably wise to put it on the add alternate list at this point because we are in flux when it comes to the 1928 building, and let's figure that out. And then, and then address it potentially later.
Just anything more that the baseball field for now, and then we will absolutely open it up for any questions or thoughts. All right, so those are the two I wanted to make sure we started right off with the conversation. But any other thoughts, questions, or anything else on any of the items that Mark walked us through that are on the list? Need more clarification or?
Just one last quick question. In the working group, the sidewalks and the bituminous, I know that there were still discussions that had to be done with engineering on what that would actually be. And those discussions done, like, can you reduce it, the width or whatever? Are those discussions finalized and are these numbers reflective of those discussions?
So I reached out to engineering to set up a time. We were going to be scheduled for today. However, the request was that engineering would prefer that we have the architect identify the areas first, bring them to them for their review and approval, as opposed to looking through them, identifying what they can live with, and then going to the design group. So that was sort of that changed today. So we've instructed or reached out to TSKP to see if that could be possible.
Okay, so then these numbers could vary a little bit.
Yes.
That number would still be under without that number, right?
Correct. Yes.
So would it make sense to wait until we have that review? I mean, I'd hate to come back after this process and then try and add something back in as well. That's never gonna.
But if they stay as an add alternate, they are out as a number.
But if we leave it
There's
as a pending,
placeholder,
we're still
but that
under with
placeholder-
this round, and then we still have it as something that's pending if we come to another.
One of the things there on a locomotive heading towards construction documents in a very short window of time. And the challenge is going to be not hold them up. They need to proceed and complete these documents, and we've given them Well, collectively, we, the design team, the construction manager, the program manager, and all of the owners has agreed upon a path forward. And they are at a point now where they have to finish the drawing.
No, I get that. I'm just not sure the owners agreed on this one, if we're still in review with the town, right?
Well, there's been an agreement to reduce the square footage of sidewalks by 20%. And
That's
there's been an
50%,
agreement
it says,
to
from,
convert a certain percentage of concrete sidewalks to asphalt. What we're gonna work on is finding the best places to make those adjustments.
Yeah, the percentage may not be achieved. So the number may be adjusted.
Yeah, so this 511 that we're looking at as a baseline, maybe less.
Right.
So I understand your point that the numbers are showing 511, but those numbers might, well, let's back up. These didn't show up out of thin air. There must have been some discussions, even if they were in just working group, not working group, sorry. I didn't use that right. Within the partners and the many meetings you alluded to, these numbers didn't just show up out of midair. There must have been some discussion around them. And why a 50% or like just like you asked, a 10% skylight or a 30% this or 50% this. Did these numbers evolve from discussions if you feel confident of them?
So we had conversations and looked to the design group to say, so what ONG took the approach to say, listen, you have X amount of skylights, where you have this much skylights. What percentage could we agree to that would be, work programmatically to get to where we feel and TSCP feels the design is not crippled to the point where it's not producing what the design intent was. And so we went back and forth. There was a lot of back and forth in terms of what percentages were agreed to. We had to get to a number.
Right, and that I understand, because that, we talked about that at working group, but when it comes to the deducting 50% of or 20% of the concrete sidewalk area.
So we had conversations to say perhaps we could go from 6 foot wide, 5 foot wide, how much would that reduce? What closer to the building would we look at? Where would we make those changes? And I think in conversations with the working group, we kind of talked with Russ to sort of say, we want to give you the opportunity to tell us what you can live with and what would make the most sense. I think it was my understanding that the percentages, although painful, we as a professional team agreed to carry those percentages, but maybe we can't achieve that, and so I'm not sure why not.
So when this item came up, that's why I made the suggestion that engineering needs to agree to what pavement could be cut and what pavement could be changed. And we don't have consensus on that yet. So one possibility is don't accept those alternates yet. We don't have consensus on them. You were asked us today to take a cut at making the cuts. Maybe these alternates should be eliminated from the list. It makes that 511 smaller.
No, understood. And this is going back to Sam's point. I'd like to see them investigated, because if there's savings to get there, then, we can realize those savings somewhere else. I don't want to just get rid of them. But I also don't want to carry numbers that aren't transparent and or haven't been vetted. I'd be looking for how to handle this, at least from a committee standpoint. And you're asking us to agree with this, and we're 99% there. How do we put into a motion this little portion so it's not confusing and we don't forget about it?
Yeah, we have another estimate to do. So I mean, we could eliminate it altogether from the list. I mean, for another example is the exterior glazing. That's not on this list. It's a $370,000 item that's being vetted.
We're proceeding with that.
So it's not on the list.
No, it's not on the alternates list. That's an item that was a decision. We are proceeding with it.
But that's not on the deduct list, so it hasn't come out of the budget yet. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to find 300 and something thousand, the exterior glass, that would be added to this.
We're
list.
cutting the glass, the exterior glass by 10%.
So it's not an
It
item
was
that.
skylights was 10 or 20 and exterior glass
20%.
was 20.
Our
So we're
recommendation would be
proceeding
for
with
you to
that.
proceed with this alternate list.
If it's
And
not,
if there's there will be another estimate done, and if we don't achieve the percentages on here, we will come back to the committee and say, you authorize us to proceed with these reductions. Here's our CD estimate, and we met that criteria, or we missed it by X%. And then you would have another chance to say, well, go back and figure it out, if we want to meet that number, or here's the plan and we like the way it looks and it's acceptable. We're going to need your approval at that point to proceed anyway.
So another way to look at this is, the best case is that these numbers are achieved, right? And then the 511 stays the same. If we can't get to 20% and 50%, and we're some percentage below that, it just means that the number, the 511 gets reduced, right? But in reality, the total of those two line items is about $300,000. So you're still, the net savings, even if none of it was achieved, is still 211 under, right, the budget, right? So you're approving, I guess, the best case in achieving these reductions. And if they aren't achieved in total that we're, I guess, suggesting now, it would be something less, but we're still under the budget. It's not like it's going, if we're going the other way around, or in the other direction, then I would say, yeah, maybe we should pull these out. But even if we don't achieve them, it's kind of like the glass. The glass isn't on this list. Once we figure out what that glass reduction will be, we'll be able to pick that up, likely in the CD estimate.
I would just say that from an optics standpoint, I would rather approve a list to the public that shows $200,000 and shows why, and it better tells the story of why the $1.1 million of the ball field was warranted than having the 500 that may not happen. Just from an optical standpoint, I think we'd be better off not eliminating them like we stopped the discussion, but not having them on this list as an approved alternate at this point.
Do they go alternate, do they go pending?
So they would get added to the pending.
We
I
go
would
back
add
to
them
the
our
pending
list, which is
I think
in
that's both
here, so that.
Yeah, with these other items that we're researching that are gonna go one way or the other, depending on what we decide, right?
There's
Based
decisions
on
that
that.
there's information that has to come back to the working group, so like the exterior glass. We were tasked with, we said we'd rather leave it in pending because we wanted to look at where.
I'm confident that we can achieve the glass and exterior glass and the skylight targets. I'm confident. This payment, I'm less confident.
So then, going back, then I would feel more comfortable taking these off the list and putting them back into you guys' pending court, your discussions without this, and then, at least publishing a list that's accurate, at least that is not gonna come and change. It could change again for more further discussions with more estimates down the road, but it wouldn't change from what we agreed upon.
Right.
Sorry, that was a short
So
question.
what we'd be talking about is item C-104 and 105, coming off this BD recommendation list and moving to the pending. That's that one. When we get your
Yeah, I mean,
presentation.
the concrete, the bituminous, I think is fine, because that's, you looked at the amount of area and that's it. But the one that says reduced by 20%, I think is the one that's in question. Am I wrong on that?
I think you should take them both
I-
off,
yeah,
because
both,
50% is gonna be tough to do too.
Okay, perfect.
And obviously that's gonna adjust that. Base bid under budget number.
Right.
Correct, so Devin, we can go back to the budget. No, so the first slide that Mark walked us through right there, yeah. So that item number 4, accepted BE items.
Yeah.
Thank you, yeah, that there will change, back right now. And then the overall bottom line number will change. It'll be like
Say that again.
214, if I have it up right, 934 would be the under, new base bid under budget amount, 214,934.
214.
934. I believe that's what's out right.
Everybody good work, what we're doing. It's not making our business.
14934.
I'll state it in the motion too. So that we're all clear on the changes. Or would have to amend the motion. Well, right, would have to amend the motion as I asked for it. Just- Yeah. And then.
So easy.
Our rules. Okay, all right, so we obviously have some work to do on our amendment. We'll do, or on our motion will amend and put a new motion on the table, but I also don't want to cut the discussion short on any other items that we have here before we do go to amend the motion. Anything else on here that anybody wants to discuss? Yes.
It's just, maybe it's PTSD from my time on the board then, but any reduction in roofing materials?
Yeah.
You know, we're comfortable with that because of leaky, you know, we've lived through
Yeah,
leaky roofs and everything else. I mean,
Yeah.
It's actually,
Sam, you wanna add?
Which one is
most
that?
of- most of our roofs-
102, yeah.
yeah, most of our roofs are, yeah.
Okay.
And it's easier to manage over time as far as maintenance.
No, just, yeah.
This
This jumps out at me.
Have a lot of conversations.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Roof advocate.
So that's a lightning rod in this community.
All these big discussions, but I did want to ask about lockers, because I know when we went down to Guilford and even in prior conversations and having put one kid through high school and now I have a high schooler, they don't use the lockers. We used to say it's because they're not convenient, because it's a sprawling building. But then Guilford kind of played with that too. So is this based on 100% or 100% of the student population
Okay,
to have lockers?
so there's an add alternate here. This is why we need to tweak the language. There's an add alternate here for add full-size lockers.
Right, and then on the other side.
And that's not worded the same as you see it. in other, language.
Right, because in the value engineering, it says change lockers to smaller / half size,
Yeah.
so that's a
So
size
there's,
of locker.
people are writing it differently. So let me explain what's in the plans. The plans, the DD plans show 700 stations that contain 2 lockers. That's a total of 1,400 lockers, half-size lockers.
Okay.
Student lockers. Plus we have lockers in the PE areas, we have lockers in the art areas. But in the student areas, it's 1,400. 700 double lockers. Do you need 1,400 lockers based upon experiences we've had in other schools? Students don't use the lockers. It is a potential savings. And so that's why, I can't remember who came up with the idea, but maybe it was me. I suggested, look, we can have as an add alternate 350 double lockers. In other words, the base number, the base bid would be 350 double lockers, total of 700. And an add alternate for 350 double lockers.
So you could potentially reduce the number of lockers in half. And then you're talking about 50% of the student population as opposed to 100%.
And the working group reviewed that and rejected that. And so that's why it didn't make the list. So I'll take, so what you're telling me is that this 227,
that we've taken out is a non-needed number. We put that back in because right now you have 1,400 lockers, half size.
Correct.
And so we don't need this 227.
That
We'll change the lockers to that because you've already incorporated that in the base bid based on previous conversations.
But that would reduce your, that would reduce the 214, right?
The way I read it, that, this would
We would
make
add
it
it
the
back.
same number,
We
yeah,
take
this
it
would
back.
make it double.
We would take
You'd
it
have
back.
full-size lockers. instead of
Basically, you're saying I
1,400.
can have that credit back.
You would, so,
I can have that deduct back.
so. I'm not sure. This is where the language gets sure murky. So, we have 1,400 stations.
Yeah.
You want single lockers, but you want double lockers. You need double lockers to achieve 1,400 lockers.
Right, so there is no full locker option.
You cannot achieve 1,400 single tier lockers. There isn't enough room.
So if you want 1,400 lockers, you have to take the half size, which is currently in the base bid.
Correct. Well,
And in the estimate, well, actually in the estimate, we've got, we're doing a little bit better because we've got a credit here, I'm sorry, we have a deduct to go from full size to half size, when in fact, we already have half size. So.
I think what we did was we reduced the size of those lockers. Here's what's on the base bid document instead of the number 12. This EE item was actually to reduce those sizes of those lockers.
but we're completely confused.
To go even smaller, to the smaller size locker. 15, yeah, we didn't change the number of lockers, we just reduced the size of lockers.
To save, right, so that was the other thing we were talking about, that's right, so you've got two, or you can get two smaller ones, or is it four tier lockers, 4 tiered smaller lockers.
So
Bit
that,
of backpack?
yeah, we find that's really impractical. So double tier lockers are 30 inches each. That's enough for a jacket, backpack, throw some stuff in.
Yeah.
Going to quads reduces that to 15-inch high lockers. That's a box locker in an airport. That's not.
So to bullet point what we have in the design documents now, is you have 700 half lockers, 30 inches high. Or
No, we have 700
half lockers, 1,400 half lockers. You've got a half locker for the entire population built into the design documents now.
Correct.
And is in the estimate. Okay. So this line item for 227 goes to full size, 700 lockers?
Yes, yes,
Right.
yes.
Correct. That's, you could just get rid of that.
You know,
It's-
right, it's too much of a risk to get bigger, to have it for viewers.
So
That
Yeah, I think the 1,400 half size would be the appropriate.
you feel like you need to be able
Because
to
if,
provide.
even if there's a student who might want 2 and another student who wants no locker, we have that flexibility. If everyone wants a locker, we have enough.
Yeah.
So.
We also have full height lockers in the art area.
Mhm.
So if some student insists on full height, he could be assigned a locker
Yeah.
there. But the half height is exactly what we saw in Gilbert.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't feel like it's, you can't reduce it below the student population. It's too risky to.
Well, I
have
think
fewer
that
lockers
Scott
in
and I, we don't know what the future will bring. This is a building that will last a long time here in Farmington. We don't want to make a design decision that then, what were they thinking? Look, lockers are very important now, 10 years from now, who knows?
This could be a trend.
So I think we felt having one for each student made sense and the half locker made sense, and it gives us flexibility, which is what we've always said about this building, is that if it's designed for flexibility, it adapts in the future to whatever trends might be happening. And some of these trends can be really surprising. They can go way back and some disappear. You know, things that we've had in schools are no longer a trend. So I feel that that's the right approach.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to ask, because I know it's kind of a loaded
This
question.
principal also mentioned that logistically, even though they were only getting half the population to use them, finding out which half it was a nightmare.
Right, right, that's a whole administrative
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
and-
Just
yeah,
not.
So
Not worth
what I think I'm hearing is that there's no alternate here.
Correct.
It's just provide 1,400 half size.
That's gonna be big.
And that affects your estimate. For alternate.
The alternate, but not the estimate.
So pulling that 227 off, we're now $12,000 over what?
Thank you. That's the way to put it.
Because we took up 104, 105,
We took off 104, 105, and
6.
number 6.
So then to clarify this line 6, add for full size, because there's not enough space. You're going from 1,400 at half size to 700 full size, and you're saving 227,000.
It doesn't drive, I mean, it's confusing.
And that, huh?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so that item doesn't come off, yeah.
The alternate
The alternate should go away.
is removed.
Yes. Right, doesn't affect the budget.
The table is one item, and let me go back to let me go back to the full estimate. And I'll send out an email tomorrow, show you exactly what we carried, just what's on the drawings right now, what we carried in the estimate, and then what this EDI reflects. Because there was a lot of discussions about either reduce the size of lockers or reduce the number of lockers, keep them half size. I just want to confirm and make sure everybody has the right information, so.
Yeah.
Just reflecting on our best course of actions on what we do if
I know you guys are gonna hate me for this, but
finish my thought. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, we're not canceling the next meeting, right? 2 weeks from now. And could we table this until these few items are taken care of?
And
we look through that last list to see if there's anything else that we've had to do so that when we approve this, it's just exactly, we're not having these discussions going forward, whether it's wording or numbers or et cetera. Would that affect anything in the schedule to the point where if we table?
I would have to defer to Richard since this will delay.
Yes. I mean, I have guys working, long hours trying to get the documents finished and accurately illustrating the alternates. And so for the direction we've been given, I need to illustrate both scenarios.
So we were to approve the value management items tonight, with the exception of those two, because those two are coming off the list. Or the three, sorry, the two sidewalks ones and the lockers. And the committee approves the list of items without a balanced budget. So we know we've got a list of items that are approved indefinitely moving forward.
That we're not gonna change.
That we're not gonna change.
Yeah.
That should not hold up your,
I would just suggest for clarity's sake, especially for the committee and for the public, having a clean list of what is out, what is in, and potentially, if you need approval to go forward, we could also do a special meeting and just have that discussion sooner than our next meeting.
I mean, what Mark is saying is, let's approve everything but those 3 items, even if it's over budget. and then come back and shore up the last few items on a separate vote.
And
So that we're not potentially undoing what he's working on over the next, until we meet again.
And that's what you're going, correct? In 2 weeks, we would have the sidewalk vetted and we would have the clarification on the lots. So we could clean those up, those 3 lines. Right, at the next meeting, but at least approve the rest of this list tonight. So the motion would be to approve this, less those 3 items.
Which would show us a little bit over budget.
Show us about $12,000.
And then we have to come back and.
So can I make another suggestion, and then we would make one more motion to reduce the design contingency by $12,000.
You can't give us another week? Can we get it all reconciled in a week?
TSKP is telling us that he's gonna be behind, so, I'm not, we could try to revise this list and do a special meeting for the next couple of days,
But let's just be clear on a couple of points. The design right now is for a double set of lockers, 14 lockers. We're not asking you to change that. We're not adding any workloads because you're gonna keep the lockers the way you currently have designed them. The other 2 items are either reducing the size of some sidewalks or changing the composition from concrete to asphalt. That's not gonna hold you up in the next 2 weeks either. All the other items we've agreed to. So, and there's a third alternate that we're working on, which is reduction of the glass, which you've also said is going favorably. So there will be a future meeting where you will be presented with cost savings for some reduction in glass. So we can pursue, with your authority, there are no disputed items that he needs an answer on to keep him on schedule. So I don't agree with your statement that you're going to be behind schedule because we don't direct you on asphalt sidewalks. That's the only one that's going to change what you're designing. You're currently designing double lockers in 14 locations. That's what's on the drawings. That's what you said you prefer. So, Richard, I don't think we have a situation where
We're doing the best we can.
you're doing a great job, but relative to the conversation at hand, we're not holding you up.
I think we would hold them up if we didn't.
Excuse me?
We'd hold them up if we didn't approve anything. is what I-
Right,
what I
all the
meant.
other items, I think we reached this.
Well, that we have, but that was part of our discussion on the table is a level of comfort on how clean are we? Is this, absolutely accurate? We had, questions on a couple here, plus really understanding the lockers, getting down deeper in that. Is our full list of alternates complete? So we've got a lot of questions on the document in front of us. So the question in hand is, do we wait and get a clean document and approve it all? Or do we approve portions with the amendment? And I think that's what Richard was saying. If you don't approve anything,
I think
it
I
would
like,
have an impact.
you're right, and I think I'd like the suggestion that Chris made, or we eliminate those 3, the design contingency at 3.8 million, the 12,000 is literally a rounding error. Make it 0, approve this list, come back with those 3 items, and that other glass issue for a potential savings that we could even further go down, but that is next meeting. I think that's the cleanest one. I just fear we're gonna be back here in 2 weeks having discussions on those other items again.
We're also, we could, if we even took out, we're kind of making the play here with the design contingency, taking the $12,000 out, which is just, it's an accounting function, right? At that point. We are still meeting with the town. We are still hoping for some favorable savings in the sidewalk issue, I'll call it, right? I've got to imagine we're at least going to achieve the $12,000 in the sidewalk conversation to absorb that. Versus playing further complicating and saying, because I also don't want to set the precedent of just saying, oh, we'll just use the design contingency to balance it out. And I fear that by doing that this time, that's kind of the direction we're going. Right now, it's 12,000. The next time, oh, it's only 100,000 out of a $3.8 million design contingency line item. And I don't want to get into that argument. I would rather leave that for its intended purpose and leave the $12,000 as an overage right now, knowing that we're going to come back in 2 weeks with some sort of information on those 2 line items for sidewalks. So at a minimum, our responsibility as the design team, I'll call it, is to find at least $12,000 for sidewalk savings. Is that fair? Right? I mean, I would say that going into that meeting with the town, there's got to be $12,000 worth of savings there somewhere. Okay.
So are we accepting just the BE list? We're accepting it without those 3 things. Are we accepting the cost estimate? Because that would change.
I would say no.
So we're just accepting the BE list with the BE and alternate list with the removal of those items.
Correct.
And that's really the motion. And then the next one, we will approve the cost estimate.
Estimate and
That would work.
you're saying you'd come back to us. with
And an updated
these.
BE list.
Yeah.
Right. Updated BE is an
And
updated.
would we just be, just for my sake, just those 3 things, or we're not, we would be looking at the whole.
I don't think we're gonna
Lazy things, you'll have.
but that may not be revised. That's not gonna be updated or included in the next 2 weeks. That's like a CD estimate. Correct. Right, we can update that as we go along, right, but for the next 2 weeks, it would be, the update would be those 2 line items, 104 and 105.
Right, because the
And
last
clarifying the lockers. But we're assuming that that's not an issue.
I say we don't.
Right, I mean, I think that was it.
I would agree. That's fine. Yeah, we don't need to approve it.
But I don't want to say that.
Yeah. And we not, yes.
We approve the items. Reconcile the estimate accordingly with the other items.
Or I would even.
Because even if we have a special meeting, it's ready, they're not gonna be done with the town.
Right, so we would move the cost estimate to the next one. Yeah.
So that,
Well, that's what we were just talking about. So, Richard, if we were thinking about, if we were not to approve this list, the alternate list tonight, does that impact you? As long as we do the BE?
I am proceeding with everything on the alternate list because I can't wait, except for the lockers.
Yeah.
And except for the lockers on the alternates list, and except for the payment.
Because those are the 2 that were.
Not that
I'm running with everything else.
I don't want to bring up anything right now, but number 2, is that correctly stated? No.
No.
So do we want to just correct it, or do you want time, or do you have the sense of what it is?
I have a sense of what it is. The way I would word this is install porcelain tile in lieu of linoleum tile.
Yes.
Why is that less? What was the clarification?
And number 2.
Yep.
On the
Add,
add-ons.
right, add porcelain tile for,
That's not the way I would word it to a bidder. The way I would word it is install porcelain tile in lieu of linoleum tile.
instead of 4. I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
In fact, I've already drafted a alternate specification section with different language in it, which I was going to release after this meeting, just for everyone's proofreading one final time. So based on tonight's discussion, I will eliminate the locker alternate from that list, from that specification section.
So we have a motion drafted up.
Working on it.
We start seeing it at 5, 7, or something.
That's like, right?
No, it wasn't bad.
Okay, I think we got it.
And then, okay, I know Kathy just answered this, but one last time. Any other questions or thoughts or comments on anything? And I don't want to like minimize this, but all super important discussions. These are never easy. I said at the beginning, I'm sure they're going to continue to get harder. So understandably so, they're all good questions. I want to make sure, thank you for bringing all the questions up and talk because it gets us to the right place ultimately. So.
They probably have the answer, just the air conditioning. Is there an opportunity to say retaining ceilings and existing ductwork to put in air conditioning in the future? Is that what that means? I just was asking.
Oh, you're asking if
There's
wording.
still air systems for fresh air intake and everything, so that was.
Would there be opportunities in the future to add air conditioning?
So
as an option?
here's the thing about air conditioning. It takes bigger ducts to air condition a space than to heat a space. It's just because you're moving larger volume of air. So if you were to add air conditioning in the future, you could, I suppose, add a coil to the unit, but then you'd be tearing out ductwork, installing larger ductwork. It's the opportunity would be there. It's just not as simple as it's sort of. But by that point, when that decision comes up, you might entertain a change order from a contractor because you're going to be able to finish the building. You'll have a good handle on what your owner's contingency is. And then you're going to demolish the existing building. You will have uncovered any hidden conditions. You have a better idea of what your owner contingency is. You might entertain asking that contractor for a change order. That tool, that can't add it now because you can't afford it right now. But maybe after you've got some construction done, you have a better sense of your contingency.
There's another point in the
There's
process
another
that we could consider it, although it would be during a different
Correct.
process.
That's correct.
With using the chamber process.
That's correct.
Not the ideal situation, but an option. No, that's what I don't want. I want to make sure, we're joking around here, but I just want to make sure that you feel comfortable. If there is anything at all that you want to put, but now's the time to do it, so that we get this all, hammered out and we are all comfortable and.
Maggie, I just did pull up our estimate, just to talk about the locker one more time.
Yeah.
I just want to let everybody know what we carried in the base bid,
Yeah, good.
what's in the estimate right now. So standard student lockers carried 1,456 lockers, 36 inches high, 12 inches deep, 15 inches wide.
Yep.
So
They're
they're
wider.
double tiered lockers.
Yeah.
And we're carrying a total of 1,456 homes.
So since you brought it
So,
up,
yeah.
since that's what's in the cost estimate right now, why would removing an add alternate add to the budget?
Because we have it on the DE list, right? So the
This one?
226, we deduct,
Number 6.
change all lockers to small or half-size lockers. So I think that the theory there was either you reduce the number of lockers, like Richard mentioned, you go to 700 lockers, and you only allow 700 students to have lockers in the building, or you reduce the actual size to something smaller than, going from, say, 36-inch lockers to 18-inch lockers.
So this is just poorly worded.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that.
Oh, no,
So we put it on to, because there was, the way the language, it was confusing to begin with, right? And so then when we went through it, and we talked about the credit, we weren't gonna take the credit for eliminating the lockers in half. When the language was written, it was reduce the size of the lockers to smaller, half again size. Or the same amount to reduce half the lockers altogether. So when we decided not to reduce half the lockers altogether, the way I interpreted the line item was it was an either or, reduce them in half or reduce the number in half. And so what it really should have been was smaller quarter size. And so, and I had made a poor assumption that full-size lockers were in the plans, and that we still hadn't decided. We hadn't decided what it is, but Richard TSKP and the design itself has decided for you that you can only have half-size lockers if you want 1,400 of them.
That's correct. We decided for the.
I mean, so.
Don't do that again.
I saw you in Dover, then.
So saying to your point, though, that the alternate was just to add it, whatever was taken out in DE was going to be added back as an alternate.
So, so so both line items will come out. So it'll come out of this list and it'll come out of this list.
So do we need to add a number to our motion?
Well, it's still number 6.
It's the same
It's
number.
still number
It's the
6.
same motion.
So.
Same motion. I mean, no, you're
Yeah,
not,
yeah, they're gonna come up, yeah,
that doesn't change the discussion.
I think it's worded appropriately.
Because the motion states we're gonna review and update that alternate list.
Yeah.
So that, I think that will cover the removal of number 6 on that alternate. But we also distinguish number 6, I'll read it.
Yeah.
We're gonna cut, yeah, cut off the conversation. Everybody good for right now, until I read this, and then we'll make sure everybody's right. Got the list, everybody's following along with our numbers. So the motion would be.
It's like bingo.
It's like bingo, that's exactly right. So just, this isn't anything yet, I just want to make sure everybody's clear before we actually ask. We gotta amend the motion that's on the table.
Correct.
First, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear with this. So the motion would be to accept the VE list with the removal of items G104 and G105 and the alternate list as amended. And with the removal of number 6, and to review an updated cost estimate, VE list, and alternate list at the next meeting.
Yes.
A lot of bands.
Yes, a lot of it is, it sounds like, are you good?
I think we crammed it all in there.
We did.
I'm
Okay,
good.
so I made the original motion, I think, you seconded it, or I don't know. Everyone else did.
Got to redo it, no? Did what? On the first
Well,
motion?
Meg read it, and then I just moved it, and I can't remember if it was Chris or
I
I
think
think we needed.
Yeah, we decided.
Wendy seconded, yeah.
All right, so then you would read that, and
Well,
I
I'm
would
gonna,
approve as
we
amended.
first have to ask the motion to amend
Yeah,
the
You would
motion
make
on
the
the
motion
table.
to amend.
So if somebody want to ask for that motion to amend the motion on the
I'll
table.
move to amend my original motion.
Seconded again.
Okay, all right, excellent. Any further discussion on that? All right, all in favor? Opposed? All right, so the motion to amend is passed. So then I'm going, does anybody mind if I read this? Or
Go
can I
for
read
it.
it? I never am on it anymore. It used to be, and I'm not. Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to accept the BE list with the removal of items G104 and G105 and the alternate list as amended, and with the removal of number 6, and to review an updated cost estimate, BE list, and alternate list at the next meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
I mean, sorry. Don't take it from me, John.
That's good.
So Johnny second. Any further discussion on that? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so motion carries. So we've got a path forward, got some work to do in between. Tough conversation, but good ones, so we appreciate everybody participating there. Richard gives you enough, right, to keep moving forward, and then we'll obviously have some documentation, update documentation for the next meeting for us to kind of wrap all that up and make sure we're 100% clear. Yes? Okay. And we still has, anybody need a break? Or do you want to just put it in? Push through? You want to push?
I want to sell this.
Yes,
list.
yeah, we're gonna get to executive session. Yeah, so we have your.
Take your run like that.
Yeah. Executive session.
I mean, I made a
Yeah, yeah,
calculated
yeah.
guess, it wouldn't be here 2.5 hours later. Right.
Okay, so let's go right into number 3. Do we even have anybody online anymore? Wait. I think I just step out. Oh, Scott's there still. Okay. All right, thank you, Scott.
Just me.
Got anything to add, Scott?
No, not at this time. Thank you, though.
Okay, I'm gonna ask for a motion then for us to move to executive session to review and discuss the RFP responses for structural threshold peer review services and code review services.
So
Second.
All right, just for discussion, just as a reminder, this is in accordance with Connecticut General Statute, section 1-206 and 1-210B 24. We will adjourn the meeting to executive session by Connecticut General Statute. Attendance in executive session shall be limited to voting and non-voting members of the Farmington High School Building Committee, representatives from TSKP Studio, representatives from Construction Solutions Group, and representatives from O&G Industries. Just to note that approval of this motion shall be by 2/3 vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. We will move into executive session. We're coming out of executive session, excuse me, 8:08.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask for a motion to select Russell and Dawson as the finalists for structural threshold peer review services contingent upon clarification of the fee proposal.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor? All opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, and did I have a motion to authorize the town manager and professional partnership subcommittee to negotiate and set a contract with the select finalists for structural threshold peer review services?
So moved. Second.
Chris, second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. I have a motion to select Christine as the finalist for code review services.
So moved. Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. We can have a motion to authorize the town manager and professional partnership subcommittee to negotiate and sign a contract with the selected finalists for code review services.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We'll adjourn at 8:10.